The air was filled with music and laughter, the perfect backdrop to what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. My name is Linda, and I stood there in my white gown, feeling like a princess. But that feeling was shattered in an instant. Linda, dear, could you come here for a moment? My mother-in-law's voice, sharp and insistent, cut through the merriment. I excused myself from my friends and walked over to her, noticing the stiffness in her posture and the tightness of her smile. What is it, Mrs. Dalton? I asked, trying to keep my tone pleasant. It's about the way you look at me, Linda. I know a look of contempt when I see one. I'm your husband's mother, and I deserve respect, not disdain. Her words, laced with accusation, took me by surprise. Mrs. Dalton, I assure you, you're mistaken. I have nothing but respect for you, I replied, feeling a wave of confusion. Respect? Ha! I've seen the way you roll your eyes, the little sighs when I speak. You think I'm blind? You've turned my own son against me. Her voice rose, drawing the attention of nearby guests. Mom, what's going on here? My husband, Mark, joined us, his brow furrowed with concern. Your wife, she's been disrespectful to me, always looking down on me. And today, on your wedding day, she's been the worst. Mrs. Dalton's voice broke, tears welling in her eyes. Linda, is this true? Mark looked at me, his expression a mix of disbelief and rising anger. No, it's not true. I've done nothing of the sort, I said firmly, feeling a growing sense of injustice. She's lying. Mark, I'm your mother. Would I lie to you? Mrs. Dalton sobbed, clutching his arm. In a moment that felt surreal, Mark's hand came up and struck my cheek in a stinging slap. The sound echoed in the sudden silence, and I stood there, hand to my reddening cheek, as the room full of guests stared in shock. How could you? I whispered, not to Mark or Mrs. Dalton, but to the universe that had allowed this to happen. Linda, I didn't mean, Mark stammered, his anger giving way to confusion and regret. No, you show me exactly who you are, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. Turning away from them, I addressed the crowd. I'm sorry you had to witness this. Please continue to enjoy the celebration. I need a moment alone. As I walked away, the whispers began, but I held my head high. This was not the end, but the beginning of something else. A plan started to form in my mind, a plan for justice. This humiliation would not go unanswered. In the privacy of the bridal suite, I allowed myself a moment of vulnerability, letting the tears fall. But they weren't just tears of pain. They were tears of determination. I would not be a victim. I would be a victor. After the wedding incident, I knew I had to take action. The first step was to gather undeniable evidence. I reached out to a private investigator, Mr. Grayson, known for his discretion and effectiveness. Mr. Grayson, I need your help. My husband Mark and his mother have been, let's say, less than kind. Understood, Linda. What exactly are we looking for? I need evidence of their behavior, anything that shows a pattern of emotional, financial, or legal abuse. Consider it done. I'll start with surveillance and background checks. I'll dig into their pasts, finances, everything. Armed with my mission, I began recording my conversations with Mark and his mother, every phone call, every encounter. I needed all the evidence I could get. In the midst of this, I found solace in my friend Sarah. Sarah, I don't know how I'd get through this without you. You don't have to, Linda. I'm here for you always. So what's the plan? I'm collecting evidence. Mr. Grayson is helping too. I want to expose them for who they truly are. Be careful, Linda. They won't see this coming and they'll be furious. I know, but I couldn't let them get away with it. As weeks passed, the evidence started piling up. Calls where Mark's tone was aggressive and demeaning, financial records revealing his mother's tight grip on his assets, and questionable transactions hinting at fraud. One evening, Sarah and I sat down to review the findings. Look at this, Sarah. These bank statements. They're moving large sums of money. But to where? And these emails. They're planning something, but what? We need to connect the dots. This is more than just emotional abuse. It's a web of lies and manipulation. Linda, we're onto something big here, Sarah said, her eyes wide with realization. The more I delved into the evidence, the clearer the picture became. Mark and his mother weren't just toxic. They were involved in deeply unethical, possibly illegal activities. Sarah, I think they're embezzling funds from Mark's company. These documents, they're incriminating. Linda, this is serious. You need to be cautious. They won't take kindly to being exposed. I know, but I can't back down, not now. The evidence was overwhelming, not just of their cruelty, but of their criminality. It was time to make a plan to bring them to justice and reclaim my life. Sarah, I'm going to expose them publicly. Linda, that's risky, but if anyone can do it, it's you. With Sarah by my side and the evidence in hand, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for justice. The next step was clear. I had to bring their actions into the light. It was time for the world to see Mark and his mother for who they truly were. I organized an event under the guise of a big announcement, inviting friends, family, and subtly, a few media contacts. The venue was lavish, the atmosphere buzzing with anticipation. Thank you all for coming. I know you're curious about the big news. I began, my voice steady, my demeanor calm. Mark and his mother, Mrs. Dalton, stood beside me, beaming, unaware of the storm about to break. Linda, darling, we're so proud of you. Whatever the announcement, we support you, Mark said, his words dripping with insincerity. I've gathered you all here to share some important truths about my marriage and the Dalton family. I paused, gauging the crowd's reaction. Truths? Linda, what are you talking about? Mrs. Dalton's voice quivered with a mix of confusion and fear. I'm talking about the abuse, the lies, and the illegal activities that have been going on behind the scenes. The room fell silent, the air thick with tension. Linda, have you lost your mind? Mark's face turned a shade of red, his anger barely contained. Quite the contrary, Mark. I've never been more sane or more sure of what I need to do. Exhibit A, I gestured to the screen behind me, where a video started playing, a recording of one of their heated, abusive conversations. The crowd gasped, murmurs growing louder. Mrs. Dalton's face paled, her hands trembling. This is just the beginning. These documents show financial irregularities, embezzlement, and fraud. I held up a folder filled with incriminating evidence. You can't do this, Linda. You're ruining everything. Mark's voice was a mix of plea and threat. I'm not ruining anything. I'm exposing the truth, a truth that everyone needs to see. The media personnel started clicking their cameras, capturing every moment of the unfolding drama. Linda, please, let's discuss this privately. Mrs. Dalton's voice was barely a whisper, her facade of control shattered. No, Mrs. Dalton, no more private discussions. The time for hiding is over. As I continued to reveal more evidence, the reactions varied from shock to disbelief. Some guests shook their heads, while others whispered among themselves. Mark and Mrs. Dalton stood frozen, their masks of respectability falling away. This is my story, a story of surviving abuse and standing up against injustice. I refuse to be a victim any longer. The event concluded with a flurry of activity. The media swarmed around, asking questions, while many guests offered words of support and admiration for my bravery. As I walked away from the podium, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I had done it. I had exposed them publicly, maintaining my composure and control. It was a moment of triumph, a moment where I reclaimed my power and my voice. The courtroom was stark and imposing, a fitting arena for the final act of my journey. As I sat there, a mix of nervousness and determination, my lawyer beside me, I couldn't help but notice how unsettled Mark and Mrs. Dalton looked across the room. Your Honor, we are here to present the case against Mark and Mrs. Dalton, not just for a divorce, but for years of emotional and financial abuse, my lawyer began, his voice resonating with confidence. Linda, you can't win this. You're going too far. Mark's desperate whisper reached me from across the room. This isn't about winning, Mark. It's about justice. It's about showing the world who you really are. I replied calmly but firmly. The trial proceeded with my lawyer presenting the evidence meticulously, the recordings, the financial documents, everything that painted a true picture of the life I had endured. Your Honor, as you can see, the evidence is overwhelming. We seek not only a divorce but also appropriate legal action for the wrongs committed by the defendants. Your Honor, this is all a misunderstanding. Linda is exaggerating. Mrs. Dalton's plea sounded hollow, even to her own ears. Exaggerating? The evidence speaks for itself. You can't hide from the truth anymore. I said, my words directed at both Mark and Mrs. Dalton, a final testament to my stand against them. The judge, after reviewing the evidence and hearing the testimonies, made her ruling. In light of the overwhelming evidence, I grant the divorce and order legal actions against Mark and Mrs. Dalton for their conduct. As the gavel struck, a sense of vindication washed over me. I had done it. I had stood up to them and emerged victorious. With the legal battles behind me, I began the next chapter of my life, a chapter of healing and rebuilding. I found a small, peaceful place in the countryside, a stark contrast to the chaos of my past life. Sitting on the porch of my new home, a warm cup of tea in hand, I looked out at the tranquil view before me. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, birds chirped in the distance, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. This was it, a new beginning, a life free from lies, manipulation, and pain. My journey hadn't been easy, but it was worth it. I had not only survived, I had triumphed. I had found my strength, reclaimed my voice, and now I was finally free. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over the horizon, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. The future was uncertain, but it was mine to shape, a future filled with hope, healing, and happiness. This was my story of triumph, a story of a woman who refused to be silenced, who stood tall against all odds. This was my closure, my victory. The story of Linda's journey has reached its conclusion. Do you believe Linda's decision to publicly expose and legally confront her husband and his mother was the best course of action? Could there have been a different way to handle such a situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story and want to see more like it, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more compelling narratives. Your support helps us bring more stories to life.